Hey, my name is Danny Rocco. I am very, very excited to be here and to talk to you a little bit about playwriting. We have a lot to cover, so I am going to try to be as brisk as possible and time myself. But please, if you have questions, we'll circle back to that in the second half of our time together. So if I don't cover something that you want me to cover better, I can. Just a little bit quickly about me. I'm a New York playwright. I just moved to Los Angeles recently to work on a project with Twitch.tv, which if you don't know what Twitch is, I recommend that you check it out. It's pretty cool. But before I moved here, I was living in New York, teaching at one of the NYU theater company acting schools, the Atlantic Theater Company, David Mamet and Bill Macy's theater company. And I was also teaching at the City College of New York. I've had plays produced in New York, LA, abroad, and have a production company as well. Now, the point of today and what I'd like to cover with you is a lot, because we're talking about playwriting, quote unquote playwriting, the whole thing. So there are four things that I want to give equal time to. The first is what playwriting is, how it is separate from television and film, which I'm sure a lot of folks are primarily interested in or see a career path more accessibly. It's definitely easier to make money in those mediums than in theater, which we'll talk about a little bit. But specifically, what is the difference between playwriting and those other media? Then a brief, embarrassingly spare history of playwriting, which I think is important because then that leads us to the influences that you'll see cropping up in contemporary plays and in the playwrights that are working today. Then some of the traditions that you'll see in these contemporary plays. One thing we're going to come back to a lot is that it's my belief, the belief of the writers that I respect, that there are no hard and fast rules when we're talking about playwriting. There's really just habits that we've fallen into over time. So we're gonna talk about what some of those habits are. And then finally, talk more about the career of playwriting, what are the pitfalls, and the real strengths, because there are a lot of strengths to it. Now, I'm gonna share my screen with you. And go to the beginning of my PowerPoint. And there we go. Okay, so to begin, what is a play? I'm sure if you haven't been to a live play, you've seen plays on TV, you've seen characters attending plays, so you know what a play is. But even scaling it back further to, one second, let me start my timer. Even scaling it back further to, the basic elements of what a play is. A play is this natural thing that we do all the time where we tell stories to each other. I love dogs, and I don't know if you've watched puppies, but puppies do this thing that we call playing, where they kind of wrestle with each other. They bite each other's ears. It's super cute and harmless, right? Well, what they're actually doing is practicing fighting. Dogs, when they're playing like that, they're enacting a future encounter where they might have to defend themselves. It's this, they don't, consciously know they're doing this. It's a genetic thing where they're wrestling around and kind of prepping for real life. And in a very similar way, we as humans have this instinct to prep ourselves for the real world by coming up with imaginary stories, telling each other those stories, survivor stories, stories that haven't happened yet, so that way we can better navigate the world. And for that reason, plays, or the act of playing, quite literally playing out imaginary circumstances, have been around since we've been around. But, let's get more specific, right? Okay, so what is a play, like the plays that we're talking about? A play is a story that happens in real time, okay? So, and what I mean by that is not just that, the story itself can cover lots of time, it can jump through time, but the experience of the audience watching the play is happening in real time. Now, in the old days, movies were very similar, right? Like there wasn't Netflix, so a movie was showing in a movie house and that was it. And if you went to go get popcorn, you missed some stuff. In the same way, television used to be broadcast live. Now that's not the case anymore. Theater is really the only dramatic media where a story is being told in real time and your experience of the story as the audience is unfolding in real time. Unlike those other media, film and television, theater, aside from perhaps dance and opera, which we could argue are theatrical in nature, is the only story-driven media that is live. So even in like the biggest theaters in the country, like the Pantages Theater in LA, which is 2,000 seats, you're pretty close to the action in the audience. You can see the sweat on the stage. You can see the actors very messily transitioning from one moment to the next. And I think that that's very important for us to remember when we're writing plays, that the speed, the rapidity of moving from one moment to the next that you can achieve in film, you can't really achieve in plays. There is a messiness and a scrappiness to how things transition and move in a play, that childlike energy that is there even at the most professional Broadway Hamilton-esque level. And that's what makes it really fun. The other thing about a play that we always have to remember is that there is an audience and there are performers. A story that is being told to nobody is not a play. It is, I don't know what that is, an interior monologue. So you need an audience, and the audience doesn't have to be in that, you know, when we see images or stock images of a theater, it doesn't have to be the audience sits here, the theater is there, or the actors are there. I've created plays where the actors are swirling around the audience, moving through the audience. I've been to really wonderful plays where I'm walking through the action. So your conception of what the audience is and what the actors are is completely your own. But in order for a story to be told in this fashion, where we can, you know, have that relationship between an actor and an audience, there needs to be some sort of separation between the two. We need to understand what is the audience and what are the actors. In that vein, there's this incredible theater director from the 60s, 70s in America named Peter Brook. He wrote a book called The Empty Space, which I highly recommend you read. The first line of the book, The Empty Space, is I can take any empty space and call it a bare stage. And what Peter Brook is really going after with this is this idea that you can take really any space, and as long as you have an audience, you can make something theatrical happen. And the audience doesn't have to be big, it can be one person. So that's important for us to remember when we're creating, that this doesn't have to be anything specific. It can be very open. But now let's get even more specific. So moving more into like the theater history elements of our lecture. The groundwork for what we would call Western drama, caveat. When we talk about theater history, I'm going to specifically focus on Western drama, the lineage that begins in ancient Greece and works its way to the present day. And I want you to know that concurrent to what was happening in ancient Greece and in the Western lineage, there is a long, long, long lineage in the East, in Asia, Kabuki theater, No theater. Those theaters are essential to your understanding and study, your comprehensive world study of drama, but not necessarily to how to compose and create work in a contemporary American, Western European setting. There were these moments in the 60s and 70s where we cross-pollinated a lot. There was a lot of experimentation. I mean, we saw that in the music of the time and the Beatles and stuff like that, where there were a lot of theater makers like the Beatles who went over and learned from Ravi Shankar and all that. Theater artists were doing similar stuff where they were going and experimenting with No theater, which is a type of Japanese drama, and Kabuki theater. but it's not really the case today. So I'm going to focus mostly on Western lineage, but know that Eastern lineage is super crucial and important as well. Other lecture, other time. So ancient Greece. Ancient Greece is where it really all kind of began. That was a burgeoning moment across platform, across media, across philosophy, mathematics, and theater. There was a philosopher and teacher named Aristotle who was observing the dramas of the time, and he wrote a book called The Poetics, which, like The Empty Space, I highly recommend. It is an essential text if you're really serious about this. He outlines in The Poetics what the difference is between drama and poetry and like long form poetry, because at the time there was also spoken word poetry like the Odyssey written by Homer and the Iliad. And so he outlines what the difference is between that and song and drama. The two most important things for our purposes that I think are crucial are his ideas of the three unities and catharsis. So what Aristotle observes is that in drama, that he was, and he was observing playwrights. There were a lot of playwrights. The most notable playwrights from Greece that we have records of are Euripides, Sophocles, and Aeschylus. They were incredibly prolific, and there were more of them, but we lost a lot of those texts. He noticed in these plays that all of the stories had a unity of time, a unity of place, and a unity of action. And what he means by unity is that, quite literally, the time in the story was unified and condensed, the place was unified and condensed, and the action was unified and condensed. So in Agamemnon, which is a play by Aeschylus, it's the first of a trilogy of plays called the Oresteia. The action takes place over the course of, I think it's 2 days, or a day into another day. Very limited amount of time. It takes place on the steps of Agamemnon's past palace. So it's one location. And the action is unified because it moves from one action to the next action to the next action. So it's not jumping all over the place. And that's what he observed. And he noticed this pattern over the course of many of the dramas of the time. He also noticed that there was this experience in the audience, which he calls catharsis. He spells it with a K in the Poetics, but we spell it with a C. Catharsis, as you probably know the definition, it's the way it was defined back then, is the release of strong and repressed emotions. And he observes that this was actually an essential function of the plays of the time, that people would come to see plays, they would have this outpouring of emotion because they would have an empathetic relationship with the characters, they would cry or they would emote, and then they would go back and be a worker amongst workers in their society. So there was a real purpose for drama in ancient Greece. It gave people a place to exercise their emotions, and then they could go on and be a worker amongst workers. So these ideas of unity of time, place, and action, and catharsis have really not changed. They're super important to contemporary drama. I would say that like the ideas of the unities, where we can, the essential nature of that, because I'm sure you could be like, well, I know this play that has that jumps around like this, and I know this play that has 30 locations, and you're right. The essential nature of those lessons is that Aristotle noticed that the playwrights of his time were really aware of the fact that they were telling this story in a space, which was an amphitheater. And that space has limits. And going back to that Peter Brook quote, it's important for us to remember that while our imaginations can go in many, many, many different locations, we have to always come back to the truth of the form we're working in, which is that we are writing a story that takes place in one location, and the audience is in that one location with you in real time. So we'll unpack this more as we go. Okay, so now we're going to zoom through a bajillion centuries of theater history. So ancient Greece happens, right? Rome kind of takes over the Greek Empire. They do some drama. It gets a little messy with Rome. The Christian warring factions dissolve the empire, the Roman Empire, and we have an extended period called the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages, where there's very little drama, a couple of things called the medieval cycle plays. There's a play called Everyman that is really beautiful, but for the most part, there wasn't that much drama. It wasn't until this dude, this handsome guy, Shakespeare, in the reign of Queen Elizabeth in England, that we see a renaissance of, his face is intense, I'm gonna move back. We see a renaissance of the lessons of ancient Greece. Shakespeare's importance cannot be understated. He really, really, really not only brought back the lessons of the unities and catharsis, but began to explode the structure of plays. So whereas ancient Greece, those plays were happening in one location over like a day or two, with only a few characters and a chorus, Shakespeare has large casts over many, many different sets, or places, locations. He's got battle scenes. He starts to explore psychology in a way that ancient Greece, those writers did not. His characters do not operate in one emotion. They are very layered, complex. Their motives are strange. So he begins to really break open the mold of what's possible without breaking the unities, because the thing again is that he was writing for the Globe Theater, which was a semi-outdoor amphitheater. And there's a scrappiness and a childlike play to the way that his transitions between scenes and sets work. So he's not demanding realism in the portrayal of his characters or his scenes. It's very, very, there's a mind, a paid attentionness to the fact that he was writing for a specific empty space. After Shakespeare, the Victorian era in England sees the rise of a school of drama called melodrama, which is essentially drama with music. There aren't that many notable writers of the melodramatic period. The big thing to take away is that after Shakespeare, we see the importance of plot becoming the most exciting lesson. And in fact, like in today's contemporary playwriting, melodrama is still a real important influence. Like plot, the movement of plot becomes super important in that period. This handsome guy on the left, Anton Chekhov, really ushers in a new era in drama. In fact, all three of these dudes, but Chekhov really is the most important, because at the end of the 1800s, we have the Industrial Revolution. And in the Industrial Revolution, we see a broad change in not only literature, but music, all forms of art, as we see, as the socioeconomic and geographic landscapes of the world start to change. Anton Chekhov was a Russian writer. He was a doctor by day and moonlighted as an essayist, short storyist, and playwright at night. And his four most important plays are The Seagull, Uncle Vanya, The Three Sisters, and The Cherry Orchard, in that order. They're incredible. I highly recommend you read those as well. They were not successful when they were written, and he never really lived. He died in his early 40s. He didn't get to see the fruits of his labor, really. But the influence of his plays are astronomical. And what was that influence? Whereas Shakespeare's dialogue was still very poetic, he still was addressing the audience, he was, exploring form, Chekhov was really exploring how to paint life as it is actually lived. So the characters in Chekhov's plays are very realized, like they're realized authentically. There aren't long monologues, there isn't poetic verse. The characters are given the freedom to kind of exist. Like Shakespeare's plays, there are large casts, but there aren't really protagonists in Chekhov's plays. They're more landscape plays. Unlike in Shakespeare and the Greek plays, where we're dealing more with nobility, in Chekhov, we're starting to deal with everybody. Most of his characters are rich, but there's a a weird decay in their wealth that's happening because he was writing on the verge of the Russian Revolution. So there are these characters that are in the underbelly that are going to uprise and take over the aristocracy. And you can feel that in his plays. These other two writers that I have up here, this angry guy up in the top right corner who looks really, really angry, and is August Strindberg. He was another realist writer who was trying to paint things as life is the way he imagined, he saw it to be, but he was dipping into expressionism and surrealism in way before anybody else. And right below him is Henrik Ibsen, who August Strindberg was really combative with. Ibsen was super popular. He wrote a play called The Doll's House in the 1860s or 1870s, where it's about a married couple, and the woman the wife in the marriage leaves her husband at the end. It shocked the world. I mean, it shocked Europe that a woman would leave her husband, and it was an incredibly important play. All three of these were realist writers. So now, looking broadly at the influence of these writers on the rest of the century, so we have melodrama, which we talked about is drama with music. Realism ushered in by the Industrial Revolution, changes in politics. Chekhov, Ibsen, and Strindberg are really the fathers of realism. That's painting the world as it really is. After World War II, that expressionism that we saw seeds of with August Strindberg becomes its own school of thought called absurdism. And we see this really coming to the fore with writers like Samuel Beckett, Eugene Ionesco. It's expressing the world, the experience of the world. These writers had lived through World War II, they experienced the Holocaust, and they could not imagine, they couldn't put to words how ridiculously brutal and absurd living was. We see this across not just drama, but in novels as well. And we see in absurdism a realism of emotion, but as that is expressed on the stage, it can take many different forms. In The Rhinoceros, Ionesco's play, there is quite literally a giant rhinoceros on stage. Then there's this other form, which gets talked about very little, called alienation, which was pioneered by Bertolt Brecht, who's this handsome guy on the left. He survived the Holocaust as well, survived World War II, and started to write actually during World War II in Germany. And Bertolt Brecht believed that this idea of catharsis that the Greeks held on to so strongly, and that, that had been passed down from them, of an emotional purge, was actually not the best way for theater to be of service. Because if you have an emotional purge during a play, you're gonna just leave the play and then go on your merry way. And in fact, that was the function of plays in Greece, was to give people an emotional release so then they could go back to being a worker amongst workers. But Bertolt Brecht really believed that if you withheld catharsis, you could actually get people to think about their condition and institute change. So his plays like Mother Courage and Her Children, The Caucasian Chalk Circle, do not give you a cathartic release. In fact, they build up a catharsis and then take it away. It's very frustrating and very important. It makes you think in a way that plays before that did not. These other two people on the left, or I'm sorry, on the right, are wonderful writers of the current day that have had an immense impact, but we don't have the time to really talk about. August Wilson was one of the only Black writers in the 20th century to gain prominence. He was insanely prolific. It's telling, of course, that there is only one writer of color amidst all of these people, right? We'll get to that later. Carol Churchill below him is unbelievable writer. She takes these ideas of absurdism way further. So basically, like wrapping up theater history just a little bit, we have this burgeoning experimentation in the 60s and the 70s with absurdism. And then unfortunately, what happens is we have, in America at least, this thing called Reaganomics, and the country changes focus in the 80s and becomes very conservative. And concurrent with that, we have the AIDS crisis, which really decimated the theater community. Most of the people that would be my mentors have passed away from that disease. And we really, if I'm being perfectly honest, we have been building back up our theater community since the 90s. We lost a lot of creative people. And now where we are in terms of where we've landed is this place really between realism and melodrama. That experimentation in form, the avant-garde work, the absurdist work has kind of fallen away, and we are now really sitting in this place of episodic plot-driven melodrama stories and realism, painting life as it really is. This is an image from The Flick, which is an amazing play by Annie Baker, who I think is the best living playwright right now. She won the Pulitzer Prize for this play in 2012. It's about a small movie theater. It has a lot of it has echoes of all of these schools in it. It is a feat of playwriting. I recommend it highly. But that's where we are right now. It's a really good time to be a playwright because we're, I think, on the verge of a new renaissance. So now let's talk about the rules of playwriting, okay? I bring all of that history to the table so you understand where we've landed. Truly, 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 the only rule of playwriting is anything can happen that makes sense. And what do I mean by that? If we go back, flop, 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 to this, what is a play, right? What I mean by what anything can happen that makes sense is that as long as you as the writer stay true to the essential properties of the medium in which you are working, which is that this is a story that happens in real time, it is experienced in real time, it is happening live, you can't hit rewind, you can't come back to it like a poem or a novel, it is happening now. And there is a separation between audience and performers. You can do whatever you want. This lineage, this history that we're zooming through right now gives us some traditions, but not rules. So let's look at what some of those traditions are. I think it's important to know what the traditions are so that way you are aware of them and then you can break them if you want. So the first tradition is that we have a 3-act structure. Now in Shakespeare's time, he was writing in 5 acts. His plays had 5 acts. Chekhov's plays went down to 4 acts. Eugene O'Neill and the writers in America in the early 20th century did 3 acts. And now, ADD America, we have 90 minutes, no intermission, get me out. But we still have that arc, that same arc, which is the unity of action that we were talking about with ancient Greece, right? So you're still, one event leads to the next event, leads to the next event. Even the most absurd play. Now, this is a tradition, it's not a rule, okay? So you can bend it and snap it however you want. But that is a tradition that has been passed down since ancient Greece. Family story. This is a tradition. Most plays, and at the end of this, I'll have a screen up with a bunch of plays that you could screenshot. All of those plays that I'll list at the end, and most that I can think of, are about a family or a chosen family. And really, this is not because we're being, exclusive to families in theater, but it's because that's the juiciest place for stories. And ultimately, when people are connected through a series of events, they end up forming a bond that can only be described as familial. So it's a good thing to think about as a tradition. The fourth wall. So this is a tradition that really began with Chekhov. So like I mentioned, Chekhov was trying to write things as they were really happening in Russia. And before then, in melodrama and in Shakespeare's time and in Greece, characters were talking directly to the audience. They would, talk to each other and then switch on over and do a direct address. In Chekhov's plays, he operates as if there is an invisible wall between the actors and the audience. So the actors or the characters are not aware of the audience. The actors are, of course, because they're on stage and it's all playing pretend. But the characters are not aware. So that unawareness of the characters, we are peeping Toms, is the fourth wall. Then we have taking turns talking. This is a term that is coined by my colleague Shannon Fillion, who is a director I work with all the time. It's basically the rhythm of dialogue, okay? So if you think about ancient Greece, those plays were happening outside in amphitheater. So at that time, and you'll look at these texts, it's like long, long monologue, long, long monologue, long, long monologue. When we get to Shakespeare, there's like long monologue, some banter that's witty. You know, I bite my thumb at you, sir. And then a long, long monologue. When we get to Chekhov, it's much more spare. It's you speak, I speak, you speak, I speak. And then over the course of this past century, we get more overlapping. I personally, as a playwright, am highly interested and invested in exploding this taking turns talking tradition and just getting rid of it. I really write plays where the characters are wrestling to speak all the time. But the essential nature of this tradition is how, because this is happening in real time, and plays, because it's happening in real time, are similar, more similar to music than they are to poetry, how can I communicate what I need to communicate once? Because it's only going to be heard once. So that lesson, the taking turns talking, was so that everyone heard everything. But if you remember that things only happen once, how can you, or only heard once, how can you play with that tradition? That's what I'm exploring personally. White audience, gotta mention this. So, you know, most Western drama was written for white people, by white people, produced about white people, right? That's just the way it's been. And there is a whole slew of reasons that we're currently investigating as a society right now as to why that is. Of late, the exciting thing is that a lot of plays are moving away from that and into how can we tell more diverse and inclusive stories. That said, most of the people that still come to these plays are white because the plays are so expensive to go to, which is a whole, you know, we can talk about further. So even the writers of color that I work alongside, or, you know, that I've had the privilege of seeing their work, they're writing in mind with, you know, like August Wilson was writing with that in mind, that, you know, the people that are coming to see his plays are going to probably be old and white. So it's a tradition. Let's break that tradition, but we have to be aware that that is a tradition that has been around. And then finally, formatting. So as we zoom through, this is a play called August Osage County, big family play, very successful in 2009, won the Pulitzer Prize by Tracy Letts. This is Jesus Hopped the A Train, a play by Stephen Adly Guirgis. Beautiful, beautiful play, more in the line of the melodrama. Okay, so now formatting. This is kind of like the way that most plays look. And if, you know, you write screenplays, you'll be like, hey man, this looks just like a screenplay. And it's, I don't know why it is. My only hunch is that there are these two types of publishers of plays, Samuel French and the Dramatist Play Service. They publish their plays for actors and for schools who are putting on school productions of successful plays. And I think over time, what's just happened is that we've evolved into a format that looks like this. But genuinely, this is not set in stone. There will be people that'll be like, yo, write it like this. There are some grants like the Yale Drama Prize where you have to write things like this, but you genuinely don't have to. The empty space that we talked about at the beginning is an empty page on the page. You can format your plays however you want, but know that this is a tradition that has crept very heavily into contemporary playwriting and is reinforced because most writers that are working in theater are also writing for television, where there are really strict rules about how to format. So, but here are some examples of things that break the formatting. Like, this is a page from my play Convention that was produced last year in New York. It's a 28 character play with 14 extras that explores a political convention in the 40s, in 1944. And the way that this script is formatted is that every character has a staff line, like in music. And the way you read it is that it's as if the hand of time moves from left to right, and people take their cues off of each other as the hand of time moves across the page. Then at the top of this, we see an image of The Big Meal by Dan LaFranc, who does something different. This play was about a dinner, a family dinner that happens. And so there was a lot of overlapping dialogue. And then here's a selection from a play, a very famous play called 448 Psychosis by Sarah Kane, her last play about psychological deterioration and depression. And she writes this more like poetry, but it is very much a play. So you can do really whatever you want, is the thesis of this, but know that the tradition is to format your stuff like screenplays for some reason. All right. So why do you want to be a playwright? I'll tell you, there's a lot of perks. There's a lot of perks to being a playwright. First and foremost, playwrights have the most freedom of any of the dramatic mediums. Like I've been saying over and over, these are traditions, they're not rules, right? So there are no explicit rules when you're writing a play. It just has to make sense. It just has to make sense. So with that in mind, you have free reign as a playwright to do whatever you want to do. And you're not going to really get that when you do other medium. You're not. So playwriting is incredibly freeing. Playwriting is not capitalist. Now, what do I mean by that? Most theater companies are not-for-profits. So they are not interested in trying, I love Hollywood. I live in Hollywood. But Hollywood is a capitalist enterprise. If something is successful in Hollywood, the goal is to repeat it over and over and over. That's why there are 10 different versions of Breaking Bad on Netflix right now, all called something different, right? It's not about originality. But then, of course, people are like, oh my God, that's so original. It's about recreation. It's about making money. Playwriting is not that way. The theater, it's the whole system. Theaters are not-for-profits, so they're charitable organizations. They are surviving off of ticket sales, but mostly off of government grants, individual donations, and by creating educational opportunities for the community that get them those grants. So like the theater I worked at in New York, the Atlantic Theater, was a working theater. It's David Mamet's theater, but it's also a school. I taught at the NYU program, right? So we are affiliated with a school and a theater. They coexist together, and that lets writers like me have a life, because I can develop my work on my own time. With that in mind, aside from Broadway where things become commercial, it's really about the playwright. It's really about you being you. You can't recreate Danny Rocco over and over and over. And so the capitalist, like, churn it out, doesn't work. It doesn't work in playwriting, which is really exciting. There is a direct line between the script and the stage. I think this is the most important thing. You've probably been wondering, what does he mean by as long as it makes sense? Well, here's how you know. If you write a play and you get two friends to read it with you and you're listening to them, right? You'll know immediately if it works. And you'll know immediately because if the dialogue is truthfully rendered, they will connect with each other and you will connect with them. And that taut rope, that triangle between the actors and the audience and the actors, is only sustained if the thing you're creating is working. And because you don't have to wait for sets and lighting cues and all the stuff that you would do in a movie, you really have the ability to test out your stuff anytime, anywhere when you're a playwright. All you need is an empty space and an audience to create a play. And so that excuse of, oh, I can't get my work produced, it doesn't fly when you're a playwright. Being a playwright is for the scrappy, it is for the hustler. And that is one of the benefits, really, is that you can just make things all the time. It's collaboration of the purest form. I had the privilege of having one of my plays being made into a film. And 2 years ago, we were on the set, now we're in post-production. And I'm a total theater dude. And I was in this set and I just marveled at, like, I mean, the electricity on a film set's amazing, but when stuff goes wrong, it's like nobody knows how to do anybody else's job. It's like everybody's really specific at one thing and that's it. In a play, if you've been in this business for a while, you have been probably doing everything. You've swept the floors, you've been an actor, you've been a director, you've been a playwright, you've hung lights. So it's very scrappy. And because of that, you're really going to be in an environment of pure collaboration, even on the most high professional level. It's author-centered. So again, the author is the center of everything. Like in film, where the director is the center, in theater, the playwright is the center. Actors are trained to respect the playwright. You're not going to have people improvising your language. That's actually one of your rights. They can't do that. But at the same time, if you're in rehearsal and somebody improvises something and you're like, I love that line, you have the ability to take that line, write it in your script, and you don't have to make them a co-author because you own the intellectual property of the material. It is not like in film where you are selling your stuff. And we'll get to that in a second. So it's all about the author. And that's, again, why this isn't a capitalist thing, because we can't recreate you over and over. Pure expression of imagination, I've already said. It's amazing. So now, what are the challenges? And they're real. This is not a financially sustainable business at all. There's a saying in theater that you can make a living, you can't make a living, but you can make a killing. So you can either be eating out of a Trader Joe's bean can or make Hamilton. There's very little in between. It's true. Now, the way that people like I have like made a living is by doing many different things. I was a teacher. I do like lectures like this. And I'm working on like 6 different projects at the same time. So that kind of like stability that I think some people find even in film, you can't really find it in theater. You have to be willing to be a hustler and really scrappy. But on the other hand, you can make Hamilton. So it's a challenge. It's a real challenge, especially if you go to school and acquire some student debt like I did. It can be hard, but it's not impossible, not impossible. The other drawback that is not really a drawback, it's just the way it is that we don't have a union. So when you're a screenwriter or a teleplay writer, you are a part of the Writers Guild after you acquire a certain amount of credits. And then when you're a part of the Writers Guild, you have insurance, you have a team of people that can collectively bargain for your wages if you're being taken advantage of. Because a playwright is at the center of all of the work, when we have a play produced, when I have a play produced, I license my play to that theater company that's producing it for a set amount of time to perform that play. So they don't own the play. I own the play, which is why I can make changes in rehearsal and stuff. I own the play and I get royalties from licensing the play, letting them borrow it for a certain amount of time. Because everybody is essentially their own entrepreneur, we can't form a union because we are not selling our material the way that, you know, a plumber does or a screenwriter does. So we have a trade association, which is the Dramatist Guild. The Dramatist Guild can't collectively bargain on your behalf. We have lawyers, we have resources, grants, and all these things, but you don't get that same kind of protection. You don't get health insurance. So that's another challenge. It's another challenge. But the Dramatist Guild is incredible. They're insanely supportive. You don't have to be a majorly produced playwright to be in the Dramatist Guild. You can join as an affiliate, and then after you get reviewed, you can become a full member, pay dues, and be a part of a wonderful community. Now, ways to start. Again, we're dealing, remember that like playwriting is in your DNA. It is the thing that, just remember the dogs playing with each other, right? This is in your DNA. This doesn't have to be more complicated than who you are. So you can start writing literally right now. You can leave this lecture right now and start writing a play. I would say the best way to acquire arsenal, to acquire, to make your pen your sword, like the Dramatist Guild says right there in their logo, is to read plays, read plays. In my next slide, I'm gonna have a bunch of plays that you can just take a screenshot of and then go and read. Read as many as you can, because when you read the plays, you'll see how people do things that you might wanna do, and then you can borrow them or not, like borrow those ideas or not. Watch plays. If you're in New York and you have a library card, go to the Lincoln Center Performance Arts Library. I'm sure you can go online to the Lincoln Center Performance Arts Library. They have an incredible array of plays. They have like most productions are filmed by the Lincoln Center Performing Arts Library. And so when I was teaching, I would require my students to go to the library and watch these plays. So there's a lot of plays online. Also, and this is super important, the Dramatist Resource Directory, I underline it down here. That is a book that the Dramatists Guild publishes every year that's a list of grants, residencies, and applications for playwrights. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them, and they're specialized, awards just for women, awards just for people of color, awards for people that are in middle age, that are at the middle part of their careers, new emerging writer grants. There's a ton of things. Really, there is no reason that you can't be as successful of a playwright as you want to be. There are a lot of resources. Even though our government tries to destroy the National Endowment of the Arts with every passing year, not just this one, but every institution, and maybe overall America doesn't value arts as much as Europe does, we still have a lot of resources. So go for it. And this is that list of plays. They're in no particular order, and these are completely plays that influenced me. So there are, of course, many, many more. And that is, I think, my time. So I yield it, and I'm excited to hear from you guys.
I love that you yield your time. I'm only gonna do this so I can see. Okay, cool. Okay, well, looks like there's some questions in there. I also have some questions. So we'll go back and forth as the writers continue to come up with questions. That was so great. Just want to say that. Okay, my enthusiasm is, but that was really awesome. Thank you.
Thanks,
okay. Jerry G says, hey, Danny, previous theater work before screenwriting. Nice to hear Aristotle is alive while writing writing story. May I please ask your thoughts on writing for various stage structures like theater in the round, arena, thrust, open air, love the Greeks, and all versus the standard proscenium arch. Thank you.
Yeah. Wait, so can you see me right now, or do you just see that?
I can. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, cool.
We might want to, you can, if you want to stop screen sharing so it's just us, but you don't have to, because this is a great slide that everyone's,
Okay, yeah, I'll keep it up just so people can look at it.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, well, thank you for that question. So my thoughts are, my initial thought is do it. Please don't write in a proscenium only. So just so for the people that don't know, that idea of audience versus performer that we were talking about at the beginning, as Jerry, right, was the name, like Jerry said, takes many, many forms. You don't have to be in the classic I sit here, you are there structure that we normally see when we see images of plays. You can have your actors in the center of a space and have the audience around them, which we would call theater in the round. There was a production of, actually that first slide, my first slide, there was like a weird projection image, is from this Broadway revival of Oklahoma that has been touring around the country. Well, before Corona, it was touring around the country, and it was really wonderful. And they did it in the round. There's also, I went to a very successful play in New York called Sleep No More, which was designed as a pageant play. What that means is that you as the audience walk through this, basically it was like this they made this old house, this old factory actually, into a set that looked like a hotel. It was a play based on Macbeth, and you would walk through the house at your leisure and go through different rooms and piece together the plot based on where you decided to go. So yeah, you could do things like that. Really, I think, my personal opinion, I think it all comes back down to what story you're wanting to tell and how will the setup of the audience and the relationship of the audience to the actors and the characters best communicate that story. So in Oklahoma, in that production of Oklahoma, they let go of the proscenium setup because they wanted to create a much more visceral and intimate production. They wanted to beef up the sexuality actually in that play. And so they had you very close to the actors to make you a little uncomfortable. And it works. It worked for that revival. I did a play, so that like horizontal sheet music like screenshot I showed you from my play convention, that play, I really wanted the audience to have an experience of being at a political convention and to have the experience of not having the full story, because it's about an election and warring factions within the Democratic Party. So in 1944. So what I had was very, deliberate, the actors interweaving through the audience, and wherever you randomly chose to sit, you would get different bits of information that would affect your understanding of the election, which is very similar to real life. But that was what I wanted to do, and I felt like that was the most important setup for that particular story. So I think it just comes back down to what is the story you're telling, and how best will your story's relationship to the audience, how is the configuration going to best set up the audience to hear that story? And another thing to just keep in mind is the space that you're working in. I've seen small plays in New York. There was a play called Bloody Bloody Andrew Jackson that started at a small theater in New York called, well, not a small theater, it's an amazing theater called the Public Theater. It's a big off-Broadway theater, but then it moved to Broadway, and they didn't really figure out how to, they basically kept the same setup of the first production and moved it to a bigger house, and it really didn't work. They didn't figure out for themselves how to rewrite the story for this bigger space. So I would also keep in mind that the way that you configure your audience should really accept the truth of the space that you happen to be working in. It doesn't mean that you have to change the story, like the actual telling of the story, but how the audience is positioned and the blocking and the relationship of audience to actors, I think, has to really be felt truthfully to the space. Otherwise, you miss the essential nature of the play, which is that this is a story happening in a space with the audience right there in real time. I hope that answers your question. Can talk about it?
I think so, but he'll let us know. So a question from Amy: where do you submit your work once you have completed your play?
Oh my gosh. So Amy, go online and get the Dramatist Resource Directory. It is the greatest thing. If you go to if you just Google dramatistguild.org, I believe, or just Google Dramatist Guild of America, it'll come up, and the resource directory is right there. I think you have to buy it, but it's not expensive at all. And it's literally an index of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of applications that you can submit your work to. Grants, residencies for you to spend a month. Like I go on these residencies, I feel like a prince. Like I went on this residency upstate New York, where, people like cook for you and you just write in a castle. There are things like that. It's really cool. And I found all this through the Dramatist Resource Directory, and most of these applications are free. So you don't have to spend a lot of money when you do it. There are some that you have to pay to submit, but you can really be scrappy and find ways around that. A lot like Yaddo, when I applied to Yaddo, which was that place upstate, if you can prove to them, which doesn't require much, that you need the application fee waived because you're a struggling writer, they'll waive the application fee. Most people are pretty generous with that stuff. There's also this thing called the New Play Exchange, which came up in the past few years, which you might want to consider submitting your play to. The New Play Exchange is an online database of plays, and playwrights put their plays up on the New Play Exchange so that theater companies and schools can go on the exchange and say, I'm looking for a play with 2 women in a coffee shop. And then a list of plays will come up that take place in a coffee shop, and you might get your play produced through this. This has happened to so many of my friends, just because they put up their play on the New Play Exchange. So I would Google Dramatist Resource Directory or Dramatist Guild and the New Play Exchange.
Great. And we did answer Jerry's question, he clarified. He has another one though for us.
Ooh.
Danny, your thoughts on making it first in your hometown as versus trying to succeed in like New York City or as an off Broadway?
Oh my gosh. Do you mind asking Jerry where is his hometown?
I think I know, but Jerry lives in LA now.
Oh.
So he's in Burbank. But
your hometown's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, I know that's where he lives now. I'm not sure where he's originally from, but Jerry, if you want to pop in where you're originally from, but I'm pretty sure he's in Burbank. So.
Oh my gosh. Well, okay. So I grew up in New Jersey, and I moved to New York for school. And so I'm very biased to this. Just know I'm very biased. I believe that, well, okay, no, I'm not very biased. So, okay, I think that because when I was coming of age and went to New York, there weren't things like the New Play Exchange. We weren't living in a time when everybody is very used to Zoom, very used to being online and all this stuff. There wasn't FaceTime. So I think that right now you can make a play and get a start for yourself wherever you are, really. You can submit to these things from wherever you are. I wouldn't make if it's not within your grand plan, or you want to stay in your hometown, you have many resources now that weren't here even just 10 years ago that can help you get noticed. Again, like that resource of applications is really endless, hundreds and hundreds. You can't possibly submit to all of these things. And life will put you with the right people in the right time. So you will submit to stuff and meet people along the way if you let yourself be carried, and your career will start to take off. Most of the people I have met that have ended up being a part of my artistic journey have been through me going and submitting the things. Now that being said, and the reason I was initially ambivalent was because I moved to New York right away. And my whole do it yourself, scrappy mentality is very much influenced by being in New York and the energy of the city and just putting stuff up. But if you live in Burbank, Jerry, I mean, LA has an amazing theater community. It's, hard to find sometimes because the city is so big, but there's a lot of wonderful creativity happening. And no matter where you are, that Peter Brook rule of if you have an empty space in an audience, you can make anything happen really applies anywhere. So in terms of creating a long career, I would say realistically, you want to plant yourself in one of the major theater cities, which are LA, New York, and Chicago, or London if you're abroad, or in England, or Berlin. Berlin's a good theater city. So planting yourself there just makes it easier for you to meet people that can help bring your shows further along. But if you want to stay in your hometown and create a life, a family, like my directing partner, Shannon Fillion, who coined that term, taking turns talking, who I love and work with all the time. She lives with, her partner, her husband outside of Chicago. Like that was really important to her. But, we still make theater and she comes to New York and we do our thing, so you can do whatever you want is the point.
Freedom. That's what you said. You said playwriting's freedom.
Freedom.
And he's originally from Milwaukee. I don't know that I knew that, Jerry. It's exciting.
Ooh.
Milwaukee and then Chicago, but he's in Burbank now. Okay, so Amy has another question for you. What are the best lengths for plays? Like, is there a standard like there is in screenwriting with 90 or 120 being I would say 120 is the longest you can get away with emerging writers. Go under that, but playwriting is different.
That's a really good question. So I'm assuming it's about page count. Again, probably the worst person to ask this because that play convention that I shared a page from, it was 900 pages long, okay? So literally 900 pages long. It ran 2 hours, but because there was all this overlapping dialogue and it was very long. So a lot of people were pissed off at me, okay? Like, there were a lot of people who were like, I'm not reading your script, and that's just the way it is. But I would say like the standard, because right now we followed into this 90-minute no intermission kind of play, the standard is somewhere between, it's usually like anywhere between 80 and 120 pages. It really depends on, and the reason there's a range is because, and that range is for a full-length play. The reason there's a range is because it really depends on how you interpret tempo. So unlike in a screenplay where it's like a minute a page, and that's pretty standard, in a play, it really is like your world. And the way you interpret tempo is very specific to you. A minute a page is kind of the same. It's like, again, like if you're writing in that standard play format that most people write their plays in, it'll probably be a minute a page. So somewhere around 90 pages for 90 minutes is standard. But if you write really fast dialogue, like I wrote a two-person play that was not 900 pages. It was like around 100 pages, but there's rapid dialogue. So it ran, a little under 90 minutes. And that's just because there was rapid fire dialogue. So once you figure out your tempo, I think then you can gauge where there's not really, no one's going to be like, Amy, this is 90 pages and it should have been 120. Like nobody's going to do that in theater. But generally speaking, it's somewhere between like, I would say 80 and 120 pages, depending on your rhythm. That's for a full-length play. There's a lot of short play competitions you'll notice when you go and do some research at Dramatist Guild website. And those plays are anywhere from 10 pages to 20 pages. Again, it's all about the rhythm that you create, your relationship to tempo and time on stage. Yeah, I think that's that.
I have a bunch of questions. So while we wait for people to come in, Jerry, I see one from Jerry, but I'm going to pop one in really quickly. And it is just, will you talk a little bit about like your approach to writing? I mean, everyone has a different approach, but specifically because it seems it's so creative and freeing over there in that beautiful theater world. So how do you, when you're not in a beautiful castle, how do you kind of approach the day-to-day? Do you start with goal? Do you start with like theme? What's kind of your approach?
Yeah, oh my gosh. Well, okay, so I love David Lynch, and I've been watching a lot of his movies and his interviews lately, and he says this amazing thing in one of his interviews where he's like, it's like puzzle pieces are being thrown to me from another room and then I assemble them. And that's kind of like what my experience is like, where I'll get an image of something and it really excites me, and then I want to start to explore that. And because now I've gotten into this groove over time of writing in this way of playwriting, I chase after that image in the way I write plays. but it usually starts with an image. And the way that I set goals for myself, it gets more tangible. So over the past like 10 years, no, over the past 5 years, um, I've been very blessed to have these commissions kind of back to back to back. So I'm usually writing for very specific people. And this is actually something that I would highly recommend everybody do. So I've had these like, since like 2014, I've had these opportunities to write for different actors and create plays for them in different, sometimes big casts, sometimes small casts. I'm currently writing a play for 3 actors, or for 3 women, and then some dudes around them, but for predominantly these 3 women. And I recorded conversations with them with their permission. So I didn't do anything, sneaky. But what I did was I have actually gotten into this process very formally over these past 5 years because I was doing it so much. And this is what I did, is sometimes even before I had an image that I was chasing, but I knew I had to write for these specific people, I created a contract that said, I'm Danny, I'm the writer, I'm going to record your voice over coffee. We're going to have some coffee. We're going to talk for like an hour and a half. I'm going to record this conversation. I'm going to study the way that you talk, not what you say. And this contract prevents me from using any of the actual words or life experience that you communicate to me. So you can be as free as you want to be, but I'm going to go and study the way that you talk, your vocal patterns, your rhythm, and create a character that sounds like you and create a play. And so what I'm doing currently is I have these recordings of these wonderful women, and I'm listening to them on repeat, and they all signed those contracts, so I can't use anything that they say, but I personally get very, very excited by voice and rhythm, which is why my scripts kind of look like sheet music. And so I find my inspiration that way, and I'm kind of like piecing together, like, chipping away at a sculpture, who these characters are based on how these women sound. I highly recommend that you don't have to be as formal as me. I was doing that because I was entering into a professional relationship with these people, so that's why there was a contract. But I highly recommend that if I was, teaching you, we were in a playwriting seminar together, I would say, go and record a conversation, make sure you're doing it with their permission, so that way they aren't gonna, sue you, but like, record their conversation, record somebody talking so you can hear the way people speak. Because I find that very inspiring. The way that people talk is way more weird than it is in plays. That taking turns talking thing of like, you speak, I speak, you speak, I speak, that we see in plays, I think is like an artifice, and so I'm personally interested in like breaking that down and finding how weird and strange people talk. So that's where I find my inspiration. But currently I'm working for them, working under a deadline. And so I think the moral of my monologue just now is that you're gonna find over time, usually, the thing that gets you excited, whether it's like an image, a sound, an idea. Maybe it's like you wanna write about what's happening with Corona or something, like, I don't know. But if you're excited about whatever gets you excited, run toward that thing and use that to structure your process.
That's great. Jerry has another question. Danny,
Jerry.
Is there, I believe that you sort of touched on this, but I do think it's worth bringing up. So is there strict adherence to the playwriting format, which you mentioned there really isn't, but can somebody starting out use the screenwriting format? Have you seen that in plays?
Well, okay. If you have Final Draft, Jerry, I would recommend, there's actually a standard playwriting format on Final Draft, and I would just use that. If you really want to have a structure. The problem with screenwriting structure is that it is asking you to do a lot of the opposite things that you're going to have to inevitably do as a playwright. You know, like one of the obstacles I found moving from plays into film is like, they're like, can we have more than one location? And I'm like, you know, like film wants you to have many locations, move through time in a very different way. So I would try to stay away from screenplay formatting just because it encourages that. And it's going to make, through sense memory, you want to have a lot of locations. And again, you don't have to, like a play can be anything. So you can have a lot of locations, but I think it's important to ground yourself again in the awareness and the reality that this story, if it's a play, is going to be taking place in one location, and everybody's going to see the lights. They're going to see other people sitting next to them. They know it's fake. So you can't have like realistic accoutrement on that stage. Things are going to stand in for other things. Even the most high budget plays look fake. So having that awareness and really bringing that into your bones when you're writing is, I think, important. So I would stay away from screenwriting format, but I believe on Final Draft. I personally don't use Final Draft unless I'm writing something in screenplay format. So for my plays, I use a Word document. But if you want that structure, I think Final Draft has a structure.
It does. It definitely does.
Cool.
And then will you talk a little bit, actually, I was really curious. I want to talk format with you for a few minutes.
Yes.
When you talked about adapting your play to film that's currently in post-production, congrats, very exciting. We work with, obviously, a lot of screenwriters. That's like our MO. But I'm super curious what your experience was. Obviously, like, you can have more than one location. I remember I did improv for years, so I was like, what do you mean I have a real gun in my hand? Like, props. So I'm super curious about like your creatively, other than everyone had their own job. What was it like to kind of like shift your brain into visualizing, especially since you work visually, visualizing differently and still getting like staying true to what your play, you know, what you wrote the play for?
Oh, wow. Oh, well, this is actually like the thing that I have like nightmares about. I'm like, did I succeed? I don't know if I did. I don't know if I actually did do a good job. We'll find out. So the backstory is that, so this particular play, it's called What the Sparrow Said, and it's a short play that is being made into a movie, and a wonderful actor named Anson Mount, who was on Hell on Wheels and Star Trek and has like a big following, came to see the play and was like, I want to produce this and make it into a movie, and paired us up with this guy named Tim Guinea, who's a wonderful actor and director. And Tim began in the theater, and he knew how important this play was to me and to everyone who was working on it. So we brought most of the same people from the play over. So the actors are the same actors, and the original theater director is a major producer on the play, or on the film. So there's a lot of sensitivity in the creation of this movie to the original play. I really struggled, to be completely honest, in like the initial drafts. I felt like when I started to expand the story to other locations, it's really just like two people talking at a restaurant. And I felt like when I expanded it to other locations, I was really, really messing with the tempo. But I kept, my experience of working on the movie has been to consistently ask for help. And that has been very helpful. You know, a screenwriter doesn't have the same amount of control that a playwright has. And I really have had to like surrender myself to the people that know better. Like, and I'm very blessed with this director that he really cares about the play and really respects me, that we can have a dialectic with each other. And I don't feel like he's brushing me aside, which is, I know, the experience of a lot of screenwriters, that they feel like they're kind of like, get off the set, you know? But Tim really keeps me there. And so I just keep asking for help, like logistically. What I've discovered, and what Tim is helping me discover, is that it's not so much with this particular story about like moving locations, like having the conversation move, like in Before Sunset or something like that, that Richard Linklater film, where they're just walking and talking. It's not about that as much as it is like, how can I use film to explore the interior lives of these people? So Tim has like really been helped me with the screenplay to do more expressionistic, not as far as David Lynch, no one can go as far as him, but like more expressionistic shots of the interior life of these characters. That was really fun, because you can't do that in a play at all. So that really blew my mind. It got me so excited about movies, of like, oh, I can really dive in, kind of like in a book, to the interior life of these people imagistically in a way that I can't in a play, because it's happening in real time, in front of everybody. So that's been a real educational thing for me with this process, and a big difference from the play, and something that I only found by asking for help. So if you're in a similar situation and you don't know what you're doing, always ask for help, because genuinely, if you ask with humility, people will come to you with humility and won't take advantage of you or anything.
It's so true. It is so true. I'd rather people just be like, I don't know. And then,
right?
or I say that all the time, like, I don't know, even if I came on here as if I did. Right now I don't know.
Right.
And people are so helpful. And I trust more people who say they don't know than the people who are always answering the questions. Okay, I have another couple questions for you. I'm just gonna, we have a few minutes left, so I'm gonna monopolize. But if anyone else, writers who are here, if you have questions, you will get priority. But while we have Danny, I'm gonna ask him these. A couple of these on your list here, and actually, just in talking about adapting to films and stuff, a couple of these have been adapted to films.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear what you think about, like, which ones did it well, which ones did not, which ones, if you have any suggestions, and what in the process, what makes it be a good adaptation in your eyes, like coming from the other side?
That is such a good question. Okay, so the first one, the two that really stick out to me are Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and A Streetcar Named Desire. I feel like they really, I really think that those two in particular succeeded because the story, like the films, were really anchored by incredible performances, And also, to be honest, they were produced at a time when movies were written more like, or were composed in that 3-act classic Hollywood structure. So the movie translation, I've been watching so many old Bette Davis movies lately, and I'm like, oh my God, these movies are insane. And they move from like, she's like, like a whole life passes in these movies. I forget about that classic Hollywood structure. It's so good. But I've noticed that a lot of the movies are based on plays, and it doesn't seem to be so far-flung because they're following that unity of action so beautifully in classic cinema. So I think that these two in particular worked super, super well because they were also being made at a time when the relationship between theater and film was pretty tight, and now it's gotten pretty far away. Like film has gone in a completely different I think, place. It's doing things that we can't do in a play, for the better. Like, I think it's great. Yeah, so at that time, it felt like it was Angels in America, I think also was a really good adaptation. The reason being that one of my problems with the play of Angels in America is that there are so many locations, and sometimes it feels like again, you can do a lot of locations, it's not a big deal, but especially in like the second half of that story, Perestroika, it's like so many, like he's in heaven, then he's like in Minnesota, and it's like, oh my God, there's so much happening, that it's hard to like it feels like he's sort of, Tony Kushner, the writer, forgets that we're in the theater. But because he forgets that we're in a theater, he asks an angel to crash through the ceiling of the theater, and it's breathtaking. So there's parts of that really work in the play, and parts that I think are a little messy. But in the movie, Mike Nichols directed that movie, and I think he did such a good job of rooting it, making it cinematic. Like and the story itself is very cinematic because the play moves through all these locations. So that worked super well.
Jerry wants to know about Fences, your take on Fences.
I actually, the recent film,
Yeah, the adaptation.
I didn't see it. I'm so sorry, Jerry.
I saw it on the airplane, which I should have done it more justice. I thought it was great, but I haven't seen the play, so you know.
The play is incredible, and
yeah.
Denzel was in the play on Broadway, and I mean, talk about being within, like, you can feel that energy, like, and see the sweat, and like it is incredible, his work. Yeah, I'm sure the movie was incredible.
It's also worth noting for emerging writers, like, you know, actors, speaking as one, actors love plays. So if, you know, just like what you were saying, Danny, like people will come see plays and they'll like want to dive in much more than it's like a, you know, it's a writer's medium, but it's also an actor's medium. They really love it. So if you can find yourself, not that you do the play for the purposes of attracting an actor, but if you can create a relationship with bigger actors because they can get into juicy roles, it is a very smart way to create relationships, because they're probably more willing to do it because they get something out of it creatively.
1000%. So, you know, I was teaching, when I was teaching at NYU, I was teaching playwriting, but mostly acting. And actors are literally they're everything. I mean, like I said, I write specifically for the voices of actors most of the time. Even if I'm chasing an image, I usually think of actors. And they're the people that you can call and say, hey, can you read this? And sit at the table with me and read it. And unlike a movie where you have to kind of suspend your disbelief a little bit because you're not on the set, you'll know right away if it's jiving, if they are working off of each other, and you can feel that energy with them. So actors are your best friends, more than directors.
Hopefully we have time. I have two more. So these are so important in my mind. Two more questions. It's at time. Do you have time to go over for
Absolutely,
2 minutes? Okay. I got really excited before I looked at the time, so I feel like I pressured you into this. I have so many more questions, but these two are very important to me. So we talk a lot about pitching. I mean, like with writers, like one of the things in screenwriting is we have to pitch all the time. You know, you're because it's commercialized more than, I think, like commercialization takes over creativity a bit in screenwriting. In some ways, it's arguable, but you know what I mean. We have to pitch, so you have to kind of become really comfortable, and it's a huge thing we talk about in Roadmap, and it's just the nature of the beast. Do you ever have to pitch? It sounds like a lot of the stuff has come. Okay, and then will you talk a little bit about that and what that process is like for you, especially considering your formatting is so different. Like with us, it's like, will you read this, 96-page script, but you're like, will you read this 900-page composition I've created? I mean, it's just, I'm super curious about that process.
Thank you for asking. So with that particular play, actually, Convention, I've never, even when we were submitting the script to critics that came, we didn't submit the full script because no one would read it, right? So you have to like we had to like create kind of like a pitch deck version of convention to give to people so it was accessible. But really what I did was what you would do as a screenwriter, is I told the story of the play, which, but told it in like 10, 20 seconds, and really just got, you know, like would do it so many times over and over to people. I felt like I was pitching that play all the time, getting people excited about it. It's, you know, the story of the 1944 Democratic National Convention and the war between the Democrats, the more liberal and moderate factions of the party at the time. I became super, like I let my excitement for the thing really carry the pitch. The actual like pitch process, like the formal pitch process, so it was developed at the first production of Convention. It was produced 3 times, developed 3 times. The first production happened in 2017, right after Trump got elected. And I was pitching it to the people at the theater company that I worked at because they were going to fund the workshop production. And I just, you know, it's really not that different than the film pitching. I explained, you know, what I told the story of the event, which was a historical event. I made it really short, and I talked about why it was important in that moment to be told, and why it mattered to me. And usually with me, at least, like, and this is one of my Achilles heels, is that because I get so excited about the things that I'm creating, it usually carries my pitch. I have a very hard time being excited about things that I'm like not that excited, you know, like that I'm like kind of coming up with on the spot, to come up with different ideas. Like I had to, you know, when I was taking meetings with managers when I moved here, I found it really hard when they would be like, so what are your ideas? I'd be like, I have like one idea and I love this idea. But then to come up with like 10 is where I struggle. So, I mean, for playwrights, I think it's more monosyllabic. It's like, this is the thing that I love and I'm working on it, and this is that, and I'm pitching it to you. Versus like having many ideas. That's something I'm working on, is how to pitch many ideas with the same kind of excitement.
Oh yeah, it's hard. Then you forget that you can even come up with another idea when you're in love with the one.
I know.
And then, okay, just out of curiosity, what look at how many questions I have. Oh, you can't see it because of my look at all these questions.
Oh
Don't
my gosh.
see it? The cloud. But just for timing, I'm so curious, did you come up with the formatting? Like, I read music, I'm a musician as well. And so did you come up with that formatting yourself?
Yes. So
Cool.
now, like, as there are other people that are writing, and kind of like Dan LaFranc's The Big Meal, it came out of a necessity because I was writing just like in his play, but this was a couple of years before him, and I had never met Dan LaFranc, but I was writing a play for about 15 people at a dinner table, and that woman Shannon Fillion that I work with, and like I mentioned her earlier, she and I were working on this play, and we found it really, really challenging to track the conversations, to track the arcs of people at the dinner table, the way that we experience dinners with our families. So we kind of, coming from music backgrounds, the two of us, we inverted the play format and started to experiment with what it would be like for it to be more like sheet music. And now I have just found that that is the only way I want to write, because it gives me such clarity and such freedom with how characters sound different from each other, how different people's pacing changes. It helps me make time and speech very elastic, which is something that I find very challenging when I'm reading a normal play, is like, I just don't get a sense of, as we were talking about earlier, time, unless the author really has like a very strong sense of rhythm. I find the sense of timing very confusing in most plays. So this format gives me such creative freedom. It pisses a lot of people off because it's hard to read, but I'm working on that. And Shannon and I like created our own production company, Brontosaurus Haircut Productions, which was on the website is brontosaurushaircut.com if you want to go check us out. That's a phrase from our first play that we worked on together. So we were like, let's make that our company name. But it's a production company to house the work as we develop this form, because we really think it's important to experiment in that way.
It's so fun for 1,000 reasons, including I'm wearing a Pregosaurus. Like I got a Brontosaurus on my shirt because it says Pregosaurus. So like, what divine timing. Okay, can we end the webinar on this question? And then I'm done. I swear I will not.
No, I'm so honored and excited.
What do you watch right now that keeps you inspired, especially considering we're all quarantined and we can't be at live theater to see, feel, and experience it? Are there things that you're watching, binging, loving, hating? Do you Tiger King? I mean, what are you watching to stay inspired and excited?
I love that question. So I live with two cinephiles who are like encyclopedic in their knowledge of cinema. So every night we watch a movie. I just discovered Letterboxd, which is like the best thing in the world. It's like where you can log your movies, and it's like a social networking site for people that like movies. So I've actually been like trusting their syllabus of what movies to watch. Last night we watched Purple Noon, which is gorgeous. It's with Alain, whatever that hunk's name is, that French writer or French actor from the 60s, the Talented Mr. Ripley, the original Talented Mr. Ripley movie. But we've watched all these movies. So I've been super inspired by movies. TV, I haven't been watching so much. I haven't watched Tiger King yet. But I've also been reading.
I'm unmuting myself to say don't do that.
Okay.
It's fine. Don't be embarrassed by that. That's an honor. Don't do it. Don't do it to yourself.
I've been reading a lot of books. I recommend reading My Brilliant Friend, Elena Ferranti. Gorgeous, unbelievable. I was reading it literally up until the moment that we started this wonderful chat. And watching a lot of movies. That's the thing that's been keeping me sane. And movies are, like we've talked about, like super similar to plays because they happen in a confined amount of time. And so I feel very inspired the next morning when I start writing because some of the images from the movies really sit with me.
It's great. Jerry says, thank you. It brought back memories for him. So we might have to give it another go. And Harker knows the Alain Delon.
Alain Delon. Thank you.
Aileen, or I'm probably saying it wrong. From Indiana. Give me a break. But it's stunning in that movie. So yes. Cool. Awesome. Well, I won't take up any more of your time. Thank you so much for going over. Harker told me how to say it. Alain Delon. Okay,
Alain Delon.
Thank you, Harker.
Oi.
Okay, well, thank you so much for this, Danny. This was awesome.
Thank you, Brianna. It was just such a pleasure to meet you. And a pleasure to meet all of you out there, Amy, Jerry, and everybody else.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great Sunday.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.